Nelson Mandela. Who was Nelson Mandela? What if you lived in a country where you were judged by the color of your skin? If almost everyone you knew was black, but the government was controlled by a few white people. The government told you where to live and where you could go to school. If they wanted the land you lived on, they could take it. White people made all the laws. They also decided who would rule the country. That was the way it was in South Africa, where Nelson Mandela lived. Mandela believed all people should be treated the same. The color of their skin should not matter. He became a fighter for equal rights. It was a hard battle. He spent many years in prison because of his beliefs. But he did not quit. His fight against racism, race is made him a hero to people all around the world. Words to know. Equal rights. Treating all people the same. Racism. Treating people poorly because of their race. In his own words, real leaders must be ready to sacrifice all for the freedom of their people. Apartheid. In South Africa, there were laws that kept black and white people apart. Those laws were called apartheid. A-par-tide. Black Africans had to live in their own section of town. They had their own schools and hospitals that were not as nice as those for white people. It was a crime for them to eat in restaurants for white people or to ride white-only buses. The son of a chief. Mandela was born in the South African village of Mavezo, on July 18, 1918. His father named him Holilala, which means troublemaker. Words to know. Tribe, a group of people who share the same language and culture. His father was a chief of the Tembu tribe. One day, when Mandela was very young, his father disagreed with a white judge in the village. The angry judge removed Mandela's father from his position as chief. He also took the family's land. Mandela's mother moved her family to a farm in the nearby village of Kunu. That's a fact. In the culture of the Tembu people, men could have more than one wife at the same time. Mandela's father had 4 wives and 13 children. A new home. The family lived in 3 huts. One was for sleeping, one for cooking, and one for storage. The huts had mud walls, dirt floors, and grass roofs. Everyone had work to do. Mandela began herding goats and sheep when he was only 5 years old. When he was 7, Mandela became the first person in his family to attend school. On the first day, the teacher gave the students English names. She said he would be called Nelson. That's a fact. Mandela sometimes wore a blanket wrapped around one shoulder and pinned at the waist. Changes. In 1930, Mandela's father died. He had been a friend to the king of the Tembu people. After his death, the king invited 12-year-old Mandela to live with him. Mandela's mother did not want to let her son go, but she knew the king could give him a good life. This banner hangs in the Great Place, where Mandela, also called Madiba, lived with the king. Mandela was sad as he left Kunu. He wondered if he would ever see his village or his family again. When he got to the village of Mkekezweni, Mandela could not believe his eyes. The king had the grandest home he had ever seen. It included 2 houses and 7 huts. It was known as the Great Place. The Great Place had many buildings. Learning to lead. Mandela learned his first lessons about being a good leader from the king. In tribal meetings, the king gave everyone a chance to talk. He listened carefully to what each person said. The chiefs who visited the Great Place taught Mandela about the history of the tribe. They told him stories about African heroes. Mandela's education continued at a one-room school next door to the Great Place until he was 15. Then he went to the Clarkberry Boarding Institute, about 60 miles away. In 1937, he moved to Healdtown to attend college. In his time. In the 1920s, when Nelson Mandela was a child, life in South Africa was very different from how it is now. School. Many black children did not attend school at all. Most who did went to one-room schools in their villages. The schools were run by people who traveled to South Africa to do work for their church. Home life. A few wealthy families in Mandela's village were able to buy sugar, tea, and coffee, but most people ate only what they grew. That included beans, pumpkins, and corn. They drank milk from cows and goats. Transportation. Many white people drove cars, but Mandela and most others in his village walked. Toys and free time. Children in Mandela's village made their own toys using clay and sticks. They played games such as hide-and-seek and tag. The boys enjoyed stick fighting. History. South Africa was ruled by white European settlers. They owned much of the land and made all the laws. Student protest. Mandela started classes at Fort Hare University when he was 20 years old. He worked hard at his studies, but he had fun too. He was on the cross-country running team. He also played soccer. In his second year, Mandela was elected to serve on the student council. There were about 150 students, but only 25 of them voted. The others were upset about the bad food served in the cafeteria. They protested by not voting. Mandela wanted to support the other students. He said he would not serve on the student council. The principal said Mandela needed to take his place on the student council or leave the school. Mandela left. Words to know. Elected. Chosen for a position or office by the act of voting. Protest. To speak or act in a way that shows you do not agree with something. Runaway. Back at the Great Place, Mandela learned the king was arranging a marriage for him. Mandela was not ready to get married, so he ran away to Johannesburg. An arranged marriage. In an arranged marriage, families decide who their children should marry. Often, the marriage is used to bring two families together. Sometimes one family gives the other family money or other gifts as part of the agreement. It was a large, modern city, but Mandela had to live in a section for black people only. The homes in that area were small. They had no electricity or running water. The only work many black men could find was in the gold and diamond mines in the area. The white owners were getting rich from the mines, but the black miners worked long hours for little pay. New ideas. Mandela got a job working as a clerk in the law office of a white lawyer. He wanted to become a lawyer, and this was the first step. He also took classes to finish college. He met many people in Johannesburg. Some of them were members of the African National Congress, ANC, a group that was working for equal rights for black Africans. Mandela joined them in 1944. That same year, he married Evelyn Massey, the cousin of one of his best friends. They had 2 sons and 2 daughters. Sadly, one daughter died as a baby. Words to know. Lawyer. A person whose job is to help people with things related to the law. That's a fact. Black Africans who were at least 16 years old had to carry a passbook. It showed who they were and where they lived. By the 1950s, Mandela had become a leader in the ANC. He helped organize marches and strikes. He was also busy with work. In 1952, he and his friend Oliver Tambo set up the first black law office in South Africa. Mandela left early in the morning for work. In the evenings, he had ANC meetings. Many times, he did not get home until late at night. His children were already sleeping. His oldest son asked why his father was not there more. Mandela tried to explain. He was working to make life better for millions of black Africans. Words to know. Strike. A kind of protest in which a group of people stop work until they are treated fairly. That's a fact. Mandela started law school but had to stop. After passing a written test, he was allowed to practice law. A long trial. In 1956, Mandela was arrested, along with 155 other activists. They were charged with treason, or trying to overthrow the government. The trial lasted 4 years. Mandela's wife, Evelyn, did not agree with his work with the ANC. One day, during the trial, she took their children and left. Their marriage was over. The trial was still going on when he met Winnie Madikizela. Ma-di-ki-ze-la. They were married in 1958 and had 2 daughters. Mandela arrives by bus for a day at the trial. Words to know. Activist. A person who works to make changes. Treason. The crime of trying to overthrow or take over a country's government. That's a fact. Winnie and Mandela shared many of the same ideas. She also joined the ANC. A new direction. The trial finally ended in 1961. Mandela and those tried with him were found not guilty. After the trial, Mandela went into hiding. The government was watching him closely. It was too dangerous for him to do his work with the ANC out in the open. He moved often, so the police would not find him. He met with other ANC members in secret. Mandela said peaceful protests were not working. It was time to take stronger action. He helped create a military branch of the ANC and became its leader. Mandela traveled to other countries to get their help. He also trained to become a soldier. Mandela visited London while traveling to other countries to get support. Life in prison. Soon after Mandela returned to South Africa, he was arrested. This time, he was found guilty of leaving the country without a passport and of leading a strike. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. While he was serving his sentence, he was put on trial again. This time, he was charged with trying to overthrow the government. On June 11, 1964, he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. Mandela was 45 years old. He was sent to the Robben Island prison off the coast of Cape Town. His cell was small. When he lay down to sleep, his head touched one wall and his feet touched the other. His bed was a thin mat on the floor. He was given a bucket to use as a toilet. Words to know. Sentenced. To be told in a court of law what the punishment for a crime will be. That's a fact. During his first years in prison, Mandela could have only 2 visitors a year. 8 cool facts about Mandela. 1. In prison, Mandela secretly wrote a book about his fight for equal rights. That book, Long Walk to Freedom, was published in 1994. 2. Mandela enjoyed boxing for exercise. 3. Mandela was the 466th prisoner at Robben Island in 1964. His prison number, 466/64, became a sign of freedom. 4. To keep fit while he was in prison, Mandela ran in place for 45 minutes. Then he did 200 sit-ups and 100 push-ups. 5. Mandela planted a garden in the prison courtyard. He grew vegetables and fruit for both prisoners and guards. 6. Mandela has received more than 1,000 awards. More than 45 schools have been named after him. 7. One leader Mandela admired was Abraham Lincoln. Mandela learned about him in school. 8. Nelson Mandela International Day is celebrated every year on his birthday, July 18th. Free Mandela. In prison, Mandela was a leader. He used peaceful protests to help the prisoners get better food. They also got books, so they could study. Other prisoners, and even some of the white guards, admired Mandela. He was brave and never gave up hope. That's a fact. In 1988, 72,000 people attended a concert to celebrate Mandela's 70th birthday. Millions more watched at home. Outside the prison, he was not forgotten. In the 1980s, the ANC started a Free Mandela campaign. Free Mandela posters went up around the world. Students marched to show their support. Other governments put pressure on South Africa. They would not buy products made in South Africa or play sports against the country's teams. Words to know. Campaign. A group of activities planned to get a certain result. Talking about peace. In 1982, after 18 years at Robben Island, Mandela was moved to a different prison. On the streets, fighting between the police and protesters was getting worse. Mandela knew it was time for a change. While still in prison, he met with people from the South African government. They talked about peace and equal rights. In 1989, F.W. de Klerk became the new president of South Africa. He also wanted peace. On February 11, 1990, he released Mandela from prison. Mandela was 71 years old and had spent 27 years of his life in prison. Thousands cheered as Mandela walked away from prison with Winnie by his side. In his own words, "My life was beginning anew. My 10,000 days of imprisonment were at last over." There was still a lot of work to do. Mandela and President de Klerk had many meetings to talk about the future of South Africa. They did not always agree, but they worked together to end apartheid. They also worked to create a free country where people of all races could vote. On April 27, 1994, Black Africans in South Africa were able to vote for the first time. They elected Mandela. He became the first black president of South Africa. He was 75 years old. As president, he talked about forgiveness. The country had been divided. Now it was time for people of all races to work together. An award for peace. In 1993, Mandela and F.W. de Klerk were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. It is an international award, the highest honor, given to someone who has worked for peace. A new life. During Mandela's many years in prison, he and Winnie had both changed. They ended their marriage in 1996. 2 years later, on his 80th birthday, Mandela married Graça Machel. Graça Machel. Mandela served one 5-year term as president. Then he stepped down. He said it was time for a younger person to lead. In 1999, he began spending most of his time at his house in Johannesburg. 1918. Born at Maveso, South Africa, on July 18th. 1930. His father dies. 1941. Runs away to Johannesburg. 1944. Joins the ANC and marries Evelyn Massey. 1952. Opens the first black law firm in South Africa. 1958. Marries Winnie Madikizela. Mandela also had a country home in Kunu, the village where he lived as a child. He listened to music, spent time with family, and enjoyed watching the sunset. They were all things he had not been able to do for the many years when he was in prison. He died on December 5th, 2013, when he was 95 years old. It was a sad day for people around the world as they remembered the man who had inspired them. He taught us about courage as he fought bravely for equal rights. He showed us hope, never giving up, even when almost everything was taken from him. 1964. Sentenced to life in prison. 1990. Released from prison. 1994. Elected President of South Africa. He taught us to forgive and showed us how to live in peace. He united a nation and changed the world, making it a better place for everyone. 1998. Marries Graça Michelle. 1999. Steps down as president. 2013. Dies on December 5th. Be a quiz whiz. See how many questions you can get right. Answers are at the bottom of page 45. 1. Mandela was given the name Nelson by A. His parents. B. His first teacher. C. The king of the Tembu tribe. D. A white judge. 2. After his father died, Mandela went to live at A. The palace. B. The kingdom. C. The great place. D. Johannesburg. 3. When he was 20, Mandela A. Moved to Johannesburg. B. Started playing sports. C. Began classes at Fort Hare University. D. Got a job at a law office. 4. Nelson Mandela International Day is celebrated on A. January 15th. B. May 3rd. C. July 18th. D. September 21st. 5. In 1964, Mandela was found guilty of trying to overthrow the government and sentenced to A. 4 years in prison. B. 35 years of hard labor. C. 50 years in prison. D. Life in prison. 6. In 1990, Mandela was released after blank years in prison. A. 18. B. 27. C. 35. D. 41. 7. Laws in South Africa that kept black and white people apart were known as A. Apartheid. B. Treason. C. Tribal laws. D. Equal rights.